Some life shifts are loud, and some are quieter, but no less permanent. In this conversation, money coach and tango dancer Mikelann Valterra shares the moment her world pivoted in the middle of a sushi restaurant, and how, from that quiet ending, she began the long, messy, and ultimately beautiful work of rebuilding her life from scratch.
And I found the courage to say the words, and he found the courage to say, I think you're right. And why on earth did I suggest a handshake? What a bizarre thing. But it just felt like almost a friendship business deal. Like, we're not going back on this, are we? Like, this is official. This is a moment. This is a moment in our life. He shook his hand out, and that's where we ended it. And that is where we ended it. It wasn't with the lawyers. It wasn't with all the stuff that how long it takes to go through divorces. It was with that handshake. That is the day our marriage ended.
I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that have changed lives forever. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Life Shift podcast. I am here with Mikelann. Hello.
Hello from Seattle. I am so jazzed to finally be here with you.
Thank you for wanting to be a part of this show. I think that this is the show that I never knew that I personally needed. And I'm finding out that a lot of people need to hear these stories from people about resilience or inspiration or hope, or that there is a path forward when we feel kind of stuck in our moments. So just thank you for wanting to be a part of this, what I'm calling my healing journey.
Yeah, I'm so jazzed. Although I thought about it so much in the back of my mind today as I've been working with clients going, am I really going to like dive in and like share my own personal story, and am I ready to go there? I mean, it's interesting how it's played in the back of my mind all day. And I do a lot of podcasts, and I generally don't spend so much time thinking about an upcoming podcast. So that tells me time to dive into story.
Story is just, it's like this beautiful way that we can connect with each other, we can connect with ourselves, we can heal ourselves. So
Mhm.
I'm excited that you were thinking about it and you wanted to like dive into your personal story, because we were saying before recording how important actual stories about each other are, because that's what we gravitate towards when we want to work with someone, when we want to involve them in our lives.
Mhm. Oh, boy, that's so true. So true.
I think before we get started and we get into your story, it would be good to know, who are you in 2025? Like, how do you
Who
identify in
who
the
who
world?
am I? Who is Mikelann Valterra? Yeah. Well, who I am in 2025, I like to say that I'm a money coach by day and I dance by night. I have been a money coach and financial therapist, Matt, for, believe it or not, almost 30 years. And that's kind of weird sounding given that I'm only in my mid 50s. Like, that just makes me sound so old, right? Holy crap. I have been a financial coach for decades, and I specialize in working with women in midlife, many of whom are divorced, and that links to my story, right? Why did I choose to specialize in that as opposed to so many other, like young families, for example? And just to help your listeners out so they don't get stuck on like, what's a money coach? Half of what I do is on the emotional side of money, which is, our mindset around money, our beliefs around money. Why do we do what we do when it comes to spending and earning and things like that? And then half of what I do is on the practical side. How do you decide that you can afford to go to Hawaii? How do you know how much money you should be saving? How do you do that? Oh, God forbid, budget. How do we work with cash flow? Things like that, right? So back in the day, I debated, this is going to sound crazy, but I debated either becoming a financial planner, which is all about, money and investments, retirement, or I was going to become a psychotherapist. And it's like, well, kind of two different fields, Matt. I mean, I had an undergrad in economics, but I got a master's in psychology. So I combined them in this field that, at the time no one had ever heard of and didn't hardly exist. And now it's 25 years later. I think more people have heard of money coaching, but I've really had to kind of chart my own path and my own way because earlier in my career, it truly was just an unknown thing. I had to tell everybody, what is it you do again? Emotions and practical and all that jazz. Now there are more coaches in general, right? And there are more financial coaches, which is wonderful. So that's who I am now. And the only reason I said, work by day and dance by night is my passion, which came about after my transition, is Argentine tango. I am a crazy tango dancer. And that's what I do if I'm not working by day is I'm dancing and performing and competing and doing just all sorts of wonderful, crazy stuff in this newer chapter of my life, right? Which, goes all to these big transitions that we go through. So yeah, that's who I am.
That's who you are. You say crazy. So what makes it crazy? What makes you crazy, Argentine
Yeah, what does
tango
I well, I don't
dancer?
I guess I've never met anyone who would say I'm a completely normal average Argentine tango dancer. I think because that is an excellent question and no one has challenged me on the crazy word before. So it's because I think it's such a bloody hard dance that you've got to be almost obsessive to really get into it and love it and master it. And, it's hard to learn tango going to dance class a couple times a month. So when people fall in love with it, people love it or don't. There's no in between, right? And when people discover it, if they fall in love with it, if they're one of those, then they just tend to get obsessed and go a lot and spend a lot of time. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time.
It sounds like a healthy obsession, though.
It's better than cocaine. Absolutely. 100%. It's, yeah,
Sometimes you might need it.
I mean, it is healthy. You're right. I mean, that's the joke. You would think that all dancers would be like super, super healthy and skinny. And it's true. It's hard to dance with a martini in your hand. But, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. Just the social connections, the brain connections, the physicalness of it, the beauty of it. I mean, it's dancing. It's just wonderful.
Is it pretty precise? Is
Yeah.
it a pretty precise dance?
Yeah.
So it
It
kind of
it
aligns
is.
with that side of your brain
It
too?
does.
You have this merge?
You're totally right. You nailed me. Yeah, you're right. It's that left brain,
Well,
right brain. Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
it's
you're
like
you're
you
you're
did that
right.
with your career and you're
Yes.
doing it with your hobby too.
Bing.
So
Oh my
nice.
God, you're so right. That is bingo. I'm one of those like left brain, right brain, half and half, because here I am in psychology and finance, which is just sort of like the bifurcated brain to begin to begin with.
But it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. I completely agree with you. I mean, ideally, it should be the holistic brain. We need both. And to me, tango feels like both. It's this beautiful, sensuous, amazing, beautiful dance. And it does take some precision or you trip and fall on the floor.
No, I love that. My generation, I'm in my mid 40s. My generation, I felt like we were somewhere in between. We're very much the in between generations. Like, I guess I'm the old millennial. So we grew up without a lot of the technology, but then we got it like when we were like 13, 14 years old. And we were conditioned that our jobs had to follow a certain line. Like we had to fit the boxes and graduate and do all the things that society told us we had to do. But at the same time, we were also probably in our 20s when everyone was like, no, follow your passion, follow your dreams. And so we're in this weird place. So I love that, first of all, in just telling us who you are now, that your journey brought you through like this uncharted path that you took for yourself and like you made that happen. Because I could see a lot of people probably around you were like, what? Were they like, what the heck are you doing? You should
Yeah,
do this.
it's true. I am Generation X, and I am Generation X. Like I'm poster child Generation X. With all the good and the bad. That is Generation X. That is me. But yeah, no, I did have a lot of people saying, "What? Now, what are you doing again? What you're doing something that no one has heard of that doesn't really exist." And you're going to go be self-employed and like yeah good luck with that and yet people are fascinated because people do love the idea of money story, speaking of the power of story, right? And everybody wants to share their money story. I love that part of my work. but it's been an intense path. I don't think I came into the world at the age of 25 after grad school and go, I know, I'd like to spend my whole entire life self-employed, right? But it was the only way that I could practice this field that I fell in love with, was to do it in a self-employed. I had to create my own business. It's an intense path to be self-employed. Your whole adult life is kind of its own thing.
Yeah, well, kudos to you for one, following your passion. I think that's so big and such a great example to set for the people around you that, like, look, I followed it. It was hard, but like it's fulfilling and look at the things that I'm
Hmm.
doing.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
so good on
No
you.
regrets. Yeah.
Good. Well, I have a bunch of them. I'll list them for you. No, just
Okay.
kidding.
I'm ready.
May I'd love for you to kind of paint the picture of your life leading up to the life shift moment that we're going to center today's conversation around, knowing full well that you've probably had many life shifts in your life. But let's center it around the major one that you've identified for today. But kind of tell us the before story.
So the before story is I am married and doing all, even though I just sounded fairly untraditional, I was actually living a pretty darn traditional life, right? I mean, I met my husband in grad school and we got married, and then the next thing you should do is have a kid, and then you move to Seattle, and and you keep going on your career. That was my life. I was super focused in my career. We had our son in 1999, and you're living this lovely, normal family life as we all do, trying to work on retirement. I mean, all the traditional things, trying to look at when can we buy a house. Up to my life shift moment, I had been in practice in my business for about 10 years. And so I worked with, and this is interesting, many families and many other young married couples, people similar to me, doing our best. And I've always thought 30s are really tough for many reasons, but part of why they're tough is we're all trying to both have a career and a family all in the same decade. And so I was, right? In my 30s, I was busy with the career, with the family, with all of those very much traditional trappings. And I'm not going to say, Matt, that I was unhappy. I think I was so busy that I didn't have a lot of time for a lot of self-reflection. There certainly wasn't any dancing or art or anything that I found in kind of after the big transition. I would call it life quake, right? I mean, in many ways, to the outside, living a fairly normal life and just trying to keep up, trying to keep up, but very busy.
You know, we talked a lot about your career and how like you kind of went against maybe the norm in that sense of like kind of following your passion.
Right.
I talk to a lot of people about these like this checklist life. Like you were doing the things that maybe we assumed that society told us that like, these are the things you're supposed to do, and that equates to happiness. Did you absorb any of that? Like the next thing on the list that you had to accomplish that was going to bring you happiness, or were you happy the full time? You said you weren't upset, but did you think that like the next thing was going to be that fulfilling factor?
I was happy until I wasn't happy. How's that for the deep non-thought of the day, I was very happily married for many years. I was very happily married for many years, and that's that's part of the sadness of the life quake, right? Is that I had in many ways what I did want was someone that I loved very much and was creating a family. I mean, our biggest sadness was we were not able to have a second child because the birth of our first child was very difficult, very, 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 very difficult, and caused we just had major medical complications that took many, many years to recover from. And you're just living your life. You're living your life. And I assumed that I would live with my beloved forever. I assumed that we would grow old together. I assumed we would, definitely retire together. And I could see my husband and I are both kind of nerds. And so, I could see our bookshelves. I remember having this vision of, when we're 60 and we've got like a 1 million hard copy, of course, books, all around us. I assumed these things, as we all do, because you can't live your life without visualizing a future, and you see your future however it is you see it, but you see a particular future, and that's just kind of in my opinion how we operate as humans. You can't see blankness, and I very much saw him in the future, right? I absolutely 100% saw the future continuing as it was, in terms of, continuing to build, eventually buy a home, so on and so forth. And I would say that there was many parts that absolutely were very, very good.
That's really interesting. And I know this isn't related to your story, but the idea of picturing the future, for me, I think it was different for me. And I don't know if it's because of having lost my mom at 8, she was 32. I couldn't picture anything past, like, I thought I would die at 30 as well. So I didn't really have these visions. And I was always chasing the next thing that I somehow assumed was going to bring me happiness. And so that's where that question comes from, is because I was like, always like, yeah, dad, I graduated high school, top of my class. It didn't bring me the happiness. What next? Yeah, I went to college, graduated top of my class. Didn't bring me any happiness. Yeah, I got my MBA at 23. All the, and I just kept going and going and going and hoping that the next thing would bring me that. So that's where that question comes from, of like, I was sold a bag of goods that I never actually got. Whereas it sounds like this was what you expected of your life, and you were moving through it in the way that felt
I, I
aligned.
I think you're right. I mean, because I think part of it is my personality. I am very much a planner and a goal setter, and I have, who knows why we have these different, so many complications in our lives that make us who we are, right? And things had always gone in many ways relatively according to plan. And when I planned something, guess what? It happened because I planned it, I executed it, and the world would not thwart Mikelann Valterra's will. Of course not. So that's that.
Could it?
How could it? Because I planned it, right? And I was I was planning our financial life. I mean, trust me, I had a plan. Everything was well planned. So it's, I think, why, I always think, what's the difference between a life quake and a disruption? Because there's so many things that don't go, small things that don't go according to plan, or sometimes huge things that don't go according to plan. But does your life fundamentally change as a result of whatever happened? Like when your mom died, your whole life changed as a result of it. That's a life quake, right? I mean, your whole life changed as a result of that. And when I hit that age of 39 and my husband came to me and said, I think I'd like to go into marriage counseling, that was the beginning of the life quake, right? I mean, I wouldn't trace the life quake to that moment. That was the crack. That was the fissure. That was the ground crackling underneath me, right? Not knowing exactly where that would lead. Because I've thought through, as I've enjoyed your podcast, different things that have happened in my life that have been huge, and different people that I've lost, and different big events. And the question is always, did my entire life change as a result of what happened? Because that's this like massive life transition. That's what I would call a life quake, and what you're calling a life shift, right? And when my marriage broke up, and everything shifted and changed, and my life shifted at 39, everything changed. Everything changed. Everything changed. And I don't, you and I know, Matt, it's not necessarily an unusual story. It's just my story, right? In terms of how common is divorce, and yet how personal is the story. It's such a personal story in terms of how it impacts people. And for me, I like to say it's so interesting to have to sum up something that's so complicated, that my husband started it and I ended it, right? That when we were going back and forth, what was the moment? I used to think that the moment, when I think about my big life shift at 39, of what happened the year after the divorce, which is a huge part of that messy thing. But really, the moment was sitting in a sushi restaurant where we would go. The sadness for me was I was best friends with my husband. We were very good friends. We never divorced for lack of love. Relationships are very, very complicated. And of course, we had been in marriage counseling, and, few things are more painful, in my opinion, than marriage counseling. And it certainly sometimes works. I don't mean to say it doesn't work. Some people have happier lives as a result of it, right? But obviously, it didn't work for us. And when we went to dinner that night, I knew after X number of sessions that we were done, that he didn't want to stay married, that I couldn't stay with someone who didn't want to be married to me, right? And so I ended it. And I said, babe, I'm going to name where we are. We're not going to stay married. Let's agree to separate, and let's separate at the end of August. And if you agree, let's shake hands on it, which sounds so simple, Matt. Can you believe that I said that, right? And he just looked at me, and he got these huge tears in his eyes, and he took a deep breath, and he stuck his hand out, and we shook hands. And that's the day we ended our marriage, in that sushi restaurant, over a handshake. And did the unfolding of it take years after that? Yes, it did. We weren't actually legally divorced for 2 years because it was, very, very complex, as these things are, right? I could trace it to that. I could trace it to the moment of sitting it's like a life quake it's like a real earthquake where you have all these mini quakes around it, right? There's the earthquake, and then there's, the month later when you're sitting down and telling your almost 9-year-old son, who's scared to death when he hears this, what's going to happen to him. I remember that moment so, so clear. And then there's the outside. There's what people see. We had such a lovely marriage from the outside that when we announced we were going to divorce, it sent huge shockwaves into our community. It freaked everybody out. If we couldn't make it, who could make it, right? We were the very first of our wave to
No pressure.
no pressure, right? Yeah, exactly. And I remember a friend saying at the time, it sounds like your marriage is complete, which was a lovely way of thinking about it, as opposed to failure, 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 because, you think your whole life has just changed. I mean, this is the problem with divorce, is your entire future is gone. Right. I mean, that's how it feels, like every single thing, where you're going to live, how you're going to see yourself in the future, where you travel, all of your retirement plans, everything changes. It feels like everything's gone. And it's not really that much of an exaggeration. All your guests that have shared their very personal divorce stories, it's like our lives are jigsaw puzzles. And it feels in this moment as if the puzzle is shaken and thrown up into the air, and all the pieces come back down in the box, but they're not connected anymore. And you've got to put your life back together. And, for me, I lost everything. I lost on a financial front. I was, partly it's because I was earning more. Here I am at 40. I am a money coach, right? So there's this like secret shame in some ways. There's so many pieces to this. I have nothing. I have no house. That we didn't have a house. I lost all my retirement. Nothing. I was taken down to zero at 40 and had to start over. And I took my son, who was 9, and I moved into my high school bedroom at my mom's. Now, I love my mom. I'm very close to my mom. But also, and however, nobody wants to turn 40 living back in their high school bedroom with shades of the Duran Duran posters, right? And there's the Madonna poster, on the walls, because it's like this bizarre what is the word, Matt? It's not even reset, right? It's just this like surreal time in your life where you're back living with your mom in your high school bedroom with your 9-year-old son sleeping down the hallway, right? And that's what I did, right? And I did that for a year while I rebuilt, like up from the ashes, the phoenix rises from the ashes, where I rebuilt everything. And, a year later, I went out and bought the house, right? I went out and bought, trust me, the tiniest little fixer upper you could imagine because it's all I could afford. But proudest thing I ever did, because it was my huge up from the ashes of that year, and so much of my life and who I am and things that have evolved since then come from this life quake, this transition, this life shift where I basically rediscovered me in this hugely messy middle.
I take your lifequake piece, and I think it's very relevant in this case. And you even said it, like mine felt like it was, sure, there were little quakes after that. There were a lot of them, but that moment from 1 second to the next for me, I was different. Was there a part of this journey, whether it's when your husband came and said we need to have marriage counseling, or where you as an individual inside heart felt different? It sounds like maybe buying the house was a moment where you felt like a new person. Maybe when you moved back home, was there a part where you were like, I'm a different woman now?
It sounds so funny to say this out loud, but it really was the sushi restaurant. It was the handshake. What an odd moment to bring it down to. That moment was, as of this moment, I am alone. As of this moment, I am single. As of this moment, I have to build my own future. I have to see forward in a way that I just hadn't, because I didn't let myself go there. Until you make that decision, you don't go there. You don't see like, oh, that would mean I have to do this and this and this, because you're still, you don't know. It's like there's this massive pivot, is not even the word, right? There's this massive pivot in your life that happens, and whatever that, for me, it really was that moment. The exploration and who I became and all the things I discovered happened after that. I became a huge writer living that year with my mom. I mean, that's when I discovered morning pages a la Julia Cameron. And like, I've been writing every day since then. And that was 15 years ago.
The dance came after too?
Dance came after. Oh, 100%. I never danced in my life before. Yeah. Never danced in my life before. I was not, I was a little bit, I wrote blog posts before then, but I became a daily writer. I became a huge writer after that. And I also just started tapping into this, I guess I would call it, this well of creativity that I had never fully accessed. And you always ask yourself, well, why? I could have accessed these creative parts of me while I was still married. Why didn't I? And I can't even give you a clean, full answer, right? Part of it could simply be moving into my 40s. Part of it could be I let go of all of the ways that things should be because they were gone. They were gone, right? I mean, there was no perfect house in the suburbs with the 2.3 kids. So, once once everything's gone and you've got a fairly clean slate and you start over at zero, it's easier to see possibility because, you've got a clean field.
Did you start recreating that vision or planning the future, or did you leave it a little bit more nebulous and open for you to take whatever avenue comes ahead?
Well, I think I started almost immediately recreating. Part of it is because I am a planner. My personality didn't change. I certainly never saw a divorce, but I am a planner, and I would say in an, I don't know if you'd say this would be a twist, an ironic twist or whatever, but the process that I teach and taught people saved my own bacon, right? Because I spent a lot of time teaching people how to do like a monthly spending plan, an annual spending plan. How do you create the life you want using the money that you currently have? It's not that I hadn't always done that for us as a family. I did. It was, pretty easy, straightforward, and simple. But once I was divorced and it was just me, I had to get super creative with money, right? I had to get very creative with money. I was like, wow, I'm not making enough. I needed to solve some earning issues, right? Wow, I have to change how I'm spending. I have to figure out how to buy my own house. And I don't even have a down payment. How do I save up for a down payment as quickly as possible? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I used the process that up to that point I had been teaching for 10 years. And it was like putting jet fuel into it because I used it to save myself. I used it to recreate my own life. And I did. And I'm super, super proud of it that I had the skill set to be able to look at money. I'm not going to say cleanly and clearly because no one's clean and clear in divorce. You're still crying half the time. That would be a lie to say to say otherwise.
You're a human?
I am
That's okay.
human, and I'm here to tell you, you can do a budget and cry at the same time.
Most people do, probably.
Well, I get them to the point where they don't cry. They love it, right? But yeah, during that year, it was intense. It was very intense.
Yeah. Do you find now, so many years removed and like moving through this career still, do you find that this story, this new story that you had to create serves your clients better, serves your business better, serves in a way that you could never have expected?
I do. I do. I came to specialize in working with women in midlife, and my particular love is working with women post divorce.
So you weren't doing that
I
before.
wasn't.
You were
No, I
okay.
really wasn't. Yeah. I kind of worked with everyone on everything. I mean, financial coaching, everybody kind of needs it and will benefit to some degree. But going through that experience and seeing the power to recreate my life in a way that was possible, because, so many people think on the other side of divorce that they'll never be able to catch up with, fill in the blank. They'll never be able to buy a house if they've lost one, or they'll never be able to catch up with retirement, or they'll never be able to go to Hawaii. Or, I mean, again, they sound like very big dramatic things, but that's how you feel. That's how you feel. We're so afraid that we've lost a lifestyle that we had when we were married, and we're afraid that we'll never get that back. And I learned that no, you do get to rebuild your lifestyle, and you do get to create a life that you absolutely love. You just have to know how to do it. Because I worked so hard in rebuilding my life, it gave me a lot of focus on working with that very particular demographic, because I get it. I've lived it. I know how we're feeling about this. I mean, again, everyone's story is unique, of course, and it feels good to know I can do it, you can too, right? There is that piece of the work of working with someone who's been on that journey.
Yeah, and not to diminish that hard part of your life, but it almost gives you another layer of this empathy that you can hold for some of your clients that are going through certain moments that maybe feel this despair, and then maybe you share a little bit of your story, maybe you don't, but if you did, I would imagine that people would be like, "Oh, you understand." Which then
Yeah.
naturally has them trust. And I feel like a lot of things can come, as we said before, the power of story can create so much more than
Oh,
just telling the
100%.
story itself.
Well, and so many people in my generation, like again, I'm Generation X, right? So many people, for example, feel that they're behind in retirement or behind in savings. And that's not necessarily unique to my generation, right? Millennials feel that too.
2025.
Exactly, right? Yeah, exactly. So there is a nice thing to say, listen, I got reset to zero at 40, and I'm okay. And I am okay. And I will be okay. And you can be okay too. And I think that, when you're talking with people that either people feel like, well, they always had money, or they never went through any hard times, or they never had to do it all themselves, or whatever. It's not that people couldn't potentially have very helpful book knowledge, for sure. And there's a lot of amazing financial training out there. But working with people that have been there and been through it and know in their gut that you can do it because they've been there, and it's a very, very emotional subject. And it's not the only way that people have to rebuild their life, right? There's lots of life transitions that happen to people. I mean, I've worked with people that their life transition is, again, someone has died, right? Or they're empty nesting. I mean, there's many, many, many big transitions that people go through. But we feel very impacted around money with big transitions because we are very impacted.
I'm really curious about this handshake. And I'm curious, was that spontaneous? Was that something you had been thinking about doing but couldn't do it yet? Was that something you were very definitive and that was part of your plan to move forward into saying, okay, we've brought it this far. It's not going anywhere. It's time to check the box. We go to the next part of this.
It was bizarrely impromptu, and I say bizarrely because for me, I'm a planner, right? I didn't set, and it was our favorite restaurant, and we enjoyed it, and it was just kind of our, many couples have a place that they
Right?
love to go
A
to,
safe place.
Yeah, yeah, and we had a lot of happy dinners there. But there's so much under the surface that's going on when you guys are deep in marriage counseling, and also I think people know when they're not going to make it, but nobody wants to be the first to say we're not going to make it. And I divorced a very, very nice man, a very nice man. I knew he would have a really hard time being the one to end it. But I also felt like, that's where we are. So, and yet I still didn't go to dinner that night saying, I know, I'm going to suggest that we call it quits and shake hands on it. Right. I mean, it's like this weird, all this stuff is coalescing and all the stuff that you're talking about and not talking about, not talking about, we were at that point walking on eggshells because marriage counseling for us was so painful, was so hard. At the end of every marriage counseling session, he would hand me a little candy that the counselor had in the bowl. It's like this little peace offering. You kind of go in and hook up a lung, and oh my God, it was so hard. So I think both knew, but nobody wanted to be the one to say the final, are we there? Are we really going to end it? Are we really going to end it? And, by the time I hit what do they call that fried ice cream at sushi restaurants that are just so yummy that there's like dough and ice cream in the middle and they deep fry it really fast so that the ice cream still, was like my favorite dessert. I just felt like this is the last time we're going to have this together. And why are we pretending otherwise? And I found the courage to say the words, and he found the courage to say, I think you're right. And why on earth did I suggest a handshake? What a bizarre thing. But it just felt like almost a friendship business deal. Like, we're not going back on this, are we? Like, this is official. This is a moment. This is a moment in our life. He shook his hand out, and that's where we ended it. And that is where we ended it. It wasn't with the lawyers. It wasn't with all the stuff how long it takes to go through divorces. It was with that handshake. That is the day our marriage ended.
Yeah. Do you look back? This is going to sound so terrible, and I don't mean it in a terrible way.
Mhm.
Do you look back on that moment and that decision for yourself to put your hand out and say that? Do you look back on that moment with any kind of fondness or thankfulness or gratefulness to that?
It's a good question. I had to think about how to answer that. I do have an interesting reaction to that ice cream dessert now, for sure, because I have a strong association with that moment. It's years later now, right? And I have recreated my life, and I'm incredibly happy. And I married my tango dance partner of all fun things on the planet, and so I'm in a new life, and I'm super happy. And there is a piece of me that is like, I wouldn't have found this life if I had not let go of that first life. But that's on a wing and a prayer. You don't know what's coming. You don't know that you'll find your true life partner. You don't know all these things. There's like it's such a massive leap of faith to sail into completely uncharted waters of dark fog chaos that I've got a lot of mixed feelings about that moment. There is this openness around that moment in that it stands apart. It's almost like hard to remember the weeks up to it and the weeks after it because it's such a clear moment for me. But it's the emotion around it is almost, I know clarity is not an emotion, but there is this clearness to it that, we knew it was the right decision. So there was a knowingness of rightness, but at the very same time, an intense sadness. So yeah, it's mixed. Very, 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 very
And
mixed.
there's no right answer. It's,
Right.
I think if we take other people out of the equation and we reflect on a version of ourselves that made a pretty difficult decision, a very difficult decision in a moment, and then see where we've come from there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where that question comes from, of this fondness of, I can, think back of decisions that I made that in the moment were very hard to make, and some of them I don't have fondness for, and some of them I do. I'm like, wow, Matt, as hard as that was, you made the right decision. You made the decision that you needed, that was really hard to make, that you could have prolonged for another however long, right? But it was the right one. And so that's kind of where that comes from, is like sometimes I reflect on these moments in my own life and I'm like, oh, I'm glad you did that. Or why didn't you do that sooner? Kind of moment. So
Yeah.
that's where that comes from.
Well, and time heals. I mean, how much and many times have we heard that? He went on to find his great love, and I'm very, very happy for him for that. And we were wonderful co-parents, and we've got this, amazing son that we continued, to co-parent. And it was was it the craziest year of my life? Yeah, it was. I mean, it was completely uncharted, crazy, crazy, crazy territory where you've got to, it feels like, suddenly rebuild your entire life. And you do, we do. There's a lot of gifts from that life quake, that life shift, right? That life shift created in the following year. I just discovered many, many parts of myself, because I think I had been very tamped down and depressed, and, many, many things that lead up to, divorces are, not surprising. Most people aren't blaringly, if you're in marriage counseling and end up divorcing, chances are you're not tiptoeing through the tulips leading up to that moment, right? So
Just to
after
get
that,
somewhere, maybe.
maybe somewhere. I was not in the tulips. I was definitely not in the tulips. But afterwards, even though there was this bizarre, like, living with my mom in my high school bedroom, and, few people can envision that as they turn 40, right? But I discovered dance. I discovered art. I discovered music. I just gave myself permission to explore, 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 explore. Because when you have a huge life shift, I don't think it's that uncommon that you do things that, you haven't previously been doing, because you're almost like reordering who you are.
What was your relationship with the word failure prior to your divorce?
I did not fail. How
Okay.
about that?
And the reason I ask that is because it feels like when something happens like that you didn't expect or you didn't
Right.
plan for, it creates that space that you're describing right now to try things that you might not be good at
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
okay with that. Is that what you found when you were trying dance, or what did you try that like you totally hated or were terrible at?
I think I'm lucky that my dad was a huge model to me of, like, trying things out, and they don't have to stick. Trying things out, like I played the guitar every day for 15, 20 minutes for a year. And I'm like, "You know what? Yeah, not for me. I'm really not a guitar player." But I could chalk that up to a big fail, or I could say I tried it and it's not for me. So and I think that's just part of the parenting I was given, that you do get to try things and they don't all have to stick. I mean, after my divorce, I think it's actually a prerequisite. Every woman that divorces has to go take a pottery class. And so I took a pottery class, and in the class, there
Very
was
hard.
very hard. There was 0 men and 11 other women post divorce in their divorce process. It was hilarious, and I made a lot of misshapen, odd things that, were designed to be, I don't know what I called them. I ended up making a lot of cigarette holders, which is hilarious because I don't smoke, nor does anyone I know. So, so, but you get to try things, and I luckily I had that going in. I think for me, the more interesting question was, why was I not trying things? I was so locked up and tamped down and living the life I thought I was supposed to be living that I wasn't very creative. I wasn't trying anything. I was just sort of living and doing the career thing and the family thing and the mom thing and checking a lot of boxes, and I was not that happy.
And I would assume that with the women that you work with now, you probably hear similar stories in the sense of like what they were doing before versus the things that they might be trying now. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. I think after part of it's just women in midlife. We're all kind of uncorked in a lovely, wonderful, crazy way, right? And so when you add to that divorce and a huge life shift, we just become very, very creative and try a lot of new things and become less of people pleasers. And, I mean, there's just, in some ways, things fall away that don't serve you anymore. And I think a divorce process can hasten the shift in a great but incredibly painful, like you will change and grow personally, or else in a very condensed time. It's like being run over with the personal growth steamroller, right? You'll be like, oh, you will grow personally. And it's hard. It's intense.
Well, you said that like when you bought your house, like that was a super proud moment. Were there milestones like that in which you felt like you were, and maybe you didn't lose yourself, but you were regaining a new version of yourself or something that like was like, yes, I'm doing it.
There were a lot. I mean, a lot of them were smaller. I had stopped listening to music. My musical tastes were seemed to be arrested around 1987 when I graduated high school, and
So
apparently,
it's good when you move back.
yeah, it was great when I moved back there, the posters. But apparently music has continued to be recorded since 1987. I got back into music and had so much fun. And my friends would just tease me because I would tell them about all these amazing new groups. And they're like, oh, not new, been out there for, 10, 20 years. I mean, that was new, dancing, the fact that I would go off and take a tango class. It's like, oh my goodness, I mean, all sorts of little milestones and also finding my way to do things. It's like, I was reborn as a single mother. And so things were different, right? Things were different. I mean, yes, did I manage to cook and get dinner on for my son? I did. I had the same parenting plan with my son that you had before your mom died, in that I had him all the time, except for it was exactly what you had: Wednesday nights and every other weekend. He was with his
Such
dad.
a weird thing.
I know. When I heard you say that, I'm like, it must just be like the thing, the way they used to do it, right? That was like, it's almost old fashioned now because most people now have 50-50 plans. But, I had my son all the time, like your mom had you, right? We found our way, and I made a lot of soup and a lot of really bad pork chops. But I found that it's okay. I'm not going to ruin my child because I fry up the world's not greatest pork chop. And he still loves me. I'm very, very close to my son. I think one of the gifts is we're very, very close. And that is likely a gift of single motherhood. And, who knows? I'd like to think we would have been close regardless of a divorce, but it's different. It's a different life.
Yeah. And you probably modeled some great behaviors as you were learning who this version of you was through all of these different
Yeah.
experiments and building this new version of your life.
He saw every experiment. He's like, oh, so mom's going to do pottery now. Oh, so mom's going to take art classes now. Oh, so mom's going to, take dance classes now, and he'd tease me about it sometimes. And I say like, honey, you get to try things. You get to try things and they don't have to stick. You get to experiment and sample and try things.
Does he?
He does. He does. He's an
Oh, good.
interesting combo, not surprisingly, of me and his dad. But yeah, he definitely has his hobbies and goes. He was that intense Pokemon kid, and then he was the intense Legos kid, and then he was the, I mean, we kind of went through all the different things. Now, because he is Generation Z, he probably has a tattoo for every single hobby he's ever had. But that's generational. He's good. A lot of
You mean you didn't do
tattoos.
that when you got divorced?
No, I do not have a tattoo of my life's history on my body. My son does. And I keep telling him, like, honey, you're only in your mid 20s. Like, you got a lot of life left to live. Where are those going to go?
In this journey, as if being a single mother, trying to rebuild your life from the ashes, business owner, doing all that, and a dancer, you write books too. So how did that play? Like, what was the impetus to put an actual book together?
Well, I wrote my first book on women and earning issues and helping women conquer under earning, the pattern of underselling ourselves, because it was something that I had to heal in the wake of, the divorce. I mean, it's a subject that I'd always been curious about and working on, but boy, when you're suddenly the single mom, you really need to get your earning issues together, right? And I'd like to think that I would anyways, but it just became a huge focus for me of helping women conquer under earning. And then the book that came out in 2023 was all about rising above the money fog because, I realized when someone said to me a few years ago, Mikelann, what's your superpower? Was the question this person asked me. And I thought, well, that's an odd question. But then I thought, it's about helping women get out of the money fog. Like, that's my superpower. It's may sound bizarre and somewhat unique, but that's my superpower, is helping women get out of the money fog and all the emotions around being vague around money. And I'm starting my next book called Love, Money, and Tango, which is, just a fun book on, new life, right? How do you use money to follow your passion and not feel like being in a fog keeps you from following whatever your desires are in life? There's all sorts of different thoughts around money, but there's this concept. It's basically the illusion of history, in that we all think that we've reached our apex of who we are. Like, I am the most Michael-anness and I'm not going to change a lot in the future. And we find that we all tend to act as if we're not going to change as much in the future as we have in the past. But if you think about how much you've changed over the past 10 years, why do you think crazy, interesting, unforeseen things will happen in the next 10 years? I mean, if I look back 10 years ago, I started dancing tango 7 years ago. Okay. Well, so let's go back to my life shift. If you would have said, I foresee you will become this crazy rabid tango dancer that's out 5 days a week doing national competitions and blah, 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 I don't know how I wouldn't have believed you. I just would have thought, well, that's crazy. You can't see the future. And yet we change as much in the future as we have in the past. But as humans, we have a hard time embracing that. And I get that in a way that I didn't get it both practically and intuitively and in lived experience if I go back to my younger self.
Yeah. If this version of you could go back to that night you guys were walking into that sushi restaurant and you could like pull her aside real quick and whisper something in her ear, is there anything you'd want to tell her?
I would say it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You will end up having a wonderful, happy life. It is going to be okay. That's what I would have wanted to most know and hear at that moment. I was convinced it would be doom and gloom for much, much longer than it actually was. And I was in such shock of the future, in the way I kept saying it is, the future's gone. The future's not gone, the future's different. But because it was no longer going to be how I had always seen it, I just suddenly felt blind. I felt absolutely blind. I was so used to envisioning a certain future, and to have it definitely not there, the disorienting isn't even the word.
So many of us, as we hit that moment, we're like, how is anything ever going to be okay? And we just need to know that it will. There's something so profound about hearing these stories of resilience that we didn't know the resilience that we had, which gives me hope. It gives me
Yeah.
hope that
Yeah.
that like as a human race, we're pretty resilient and we can overcome things that in the moment feel very insurmountable.
So true. It's so, so true.
Well, if people want to find you, get in your circle, tell you their story, get your services, find your books, what's like the best way to get in your orbit?
The best way to get into my orbit is to go to the website and either grab the opt-in, which is finding what your money personality is. I absolutely love this quiz to help people figure out their psychology of money. Or they are free to book a discovery call if they want to chat with me for a few minutes. And I would just send them to Mikelann Valterra.com, which I'm sure you probably have in the show notes. And, I'm in Seattle. So sometimes people go to Seattle Money Coach. I've got clients all over the United States, but you can always, sometimes it's easier to remember Seattle Money Coach than it is Mikelann Valterra. It's kind of a mouthful.
Well, we'll put both of them there. So
okay, there we go.
I encourage you, if you're interested, definitely check out those websites. Are you on any socials if people want to find you, or
Yep,
just
everything's under
hiding
Michael.
behind
Yeah,
that?
Mikelann V. Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook. I'm
MySpace?
not on. I'm not on MySpace. I'm not on MySpace. But yeah, all the socials.
Yeah, I love that. And I encourage people, and I hope you're okay with it. If they have a story that, like, something about your story resonated with them and they just want to be like, hey, hearing you say this validated something in my own experience, I hope you'd be okay for them reaching
Yeah.
out to you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People can email me 100%. Yeah. There's lots of ways that people can find their way to me. And I'm delighted because like you said, you want your story to be helpful to other people.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on this journey, not knowing where we were going to go, really, in the conversation. It's just been such a pleasure to hear your story and hear your version of how you recreated yourself out of, really, really hard earthquake type moment in your life, or period in your life. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks for having me.
If someone is out there and you're listening and something in this conversation sparked in you, or someone in your life that might need to hear this conversation, we would love it if you would share this episode with them. So thank you for just being listeners. And I will be back next week with a brand new episode of the Life Shift Podcast. For more information, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com.